Welcome to The Block. I'm your host, Emily Proud, and the gang's all here. We got Carl Reed and Blake Brockermeyer here to break down some Week 1 action and look ahead to Week 2. And guys, we saw some spectacular quarterback play in Week 1. Some of it from guys who played teams like Rice and Utah State, but others took down conference champions and top 15 ranked teams. So guys, let's just pretend that we're all headed to New York City this weekend for the Heisman Trophy ceremony. Who are your 5 finalists after Week 1? Carl, we'll start with you.
Well, for me, I think that Bryce Young is still at the top of the list. Impressive game against Utah State. People are going to say it's only Utah State, but the defending champion of the Heisman Trophy race stays at the top. C.J. Stroud had a slow night against Notre Dame. He didn't tear up the world, but he did lead his team to a win. I'm going to keep him there because I think that he's going to be there over the course of the season, his body of work. Anthony Richardson, man, didn't he prove to us that maybe he should have been the guy all along a year ago? We'll talk about that later for sure. But made some huge plays, especially with his legs. It's going to have to improve a little bit as a passer, but great game and great win against Utah. Stetson Bennett, this is one that probably a lot of people didn't see coming. Stetson Bennett, but should we have seen it coming? Stetson Bennett leads Georgia to a huge win over Oregon. Blake has been saying all offseason that Georgia would be better offensively this year and they would win games on offense instead of just dominating on defense like they did a year ago, and Stetson Bennett showed that. Caleb Williams, he has to be there. He had a solid outing against Rice. People are going to say, well, it was only Rice. Lincoln Riley has developed other Heisman passers in the past, and Lincoln Riley's offense and against those Pac-12 defenses, Caleb Williams is going to be a guy that's definitely going to be in the mix as well.
Blake, I know you like Anthony Richardson. Is he number 1 on your top 5?
He's not number 1, but he's number 4 for me. I mean, Anthony Richardson is probably the closest thing that we've seen to a Vince Young or Cam Newton running the football in a long time. I mean, he's a 6'4", 232-pound jumbo athlete. I've got him 4th on my Week 1 Heisman picks. He had an incredible game versus Utah, big upset in the Swamp. He completed 70% of his passes for 168 yards, which is good. They're going to need him to do more as the season progresses. But he also had 11 carries for 106 yards on the ground with 3 touchdowns. And he's just a dynamic playmaker that I expect him just to continue to develop as the year goes on. I've got Stetson Bennett as number 1 for me. It's ironic that Stetson Bennett might be the most overlooked guy in the country year after year, at least the last 2 years. But he delivered a huge game, completed over 80% of his passes for 368 yards. Great decision maker, knows what to do, throws the ball away when there's nothing there, and just a really critical to the success of Georgia's team this year. I had Bryce Young 2nd. He had a great game against Utah State. Ran for 100 yards, which is, I think, the first time he's ever done that. He can run, does not do it very often, but he's got some shake to him. He had a good game on the ground, threw for 195, and accounted for 6 touchdowns, 5 touchdown passes, and 1 on the ground. So great night for him in limited action. Braylon Allen is another jumbo athlete. Fits in Wisconsin power running scheme perfectly. 6'2", 235-pound back. Ran for 10.5 yards a carry, 14 for 148 yards, 2 touchdowns. Showed some speed on a long touchdown run that he broke. Anthony Richardson I have 4th, like we talked about. And then Deuce Vaughn I have as 5th. This guy means as much to Kansas State as any player in the country, probably. He had a great outing, 18 rushes for 126 yards and a touchdown. So that's my Week 1 list, and all those guys had a great week, and I look forward to seeing what Week 2 has in store for us.
Blake, I'm going to get to those running backs because obviously we have some questions there because we're looking at quarterbacks. But let's start with your number one, Stetson Bennett. Obviously, the football world has already admitted that they were wrong about him. He opened up with plus 10,000 odds. He's now plus 1,600, so much more available to win the Heisman there. But why were we so wrong about Stetson Bennett?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with just his decision making. He knows what to do with the ball. He's not going to force things when it's not there. He gets fooled on occasion. You've seen in the SEC championship game last year him get fooled a little bit, but he's got great players around him. Let's not kid ourselves. They're loaded at every position. Their offensive line, after watching them week ones, probably the best offensive line in the country from what I saw week one. They're lots of talent around him, and he fits in their scheme perfectly. And he's a smart guy, knows what to do, and delivers a nice football. So no more sleeping on Stetson Bennett. Expectations for him, at least in my opinion, are for him to be a difference maker every week for Georgia.
Why have we forgot about Stetson Bennett? Because he wasn't supposed to be here. Walk-ons aren't supposed to be talked about when you talk about the Heisman Trophy. And Georgia has done everything since he's been there every single year to give the jobs to somebody else. And he's been able to fight it off and led his team to a national championship a year ago. He wasn't a big-time recruit. He wasn't a guy that had stars. So he wasn't an Elite 11 type of quarterback. So forget about him. He wasn't even supposed to be here. He has forced his way into the national consciousness of college football, and he's got the team around him to make big time plays and put himself in the driver's seat in that competition if they continue to win and play the way they are week after week.
It's a great story and perseverance. A guy that has been forgotten about and tried to get passed over by every single quarterback that Georgia's brought in over the last 4 or 5 years. So hats off to him for keeping the faith and fighting the good fight. And it's paying off for him off the field and his NIL deals as well. And he won a national championship as a starting quarterback at Georgia the first time in 40 years. So a great accomplishment for him. And I wish him continued success this season.
Yeah, just signed an NIL deal with AARP, which I love, as he is one of the oldest college football players this year, having played 6 seasons so far. So you'd hope that he can get rid of that, that little tag that's on him that he was a walk-on. He certainly proved himself. Carl, I got to ask you about your friend Blake putting in 2 running backs to his top 5. What do you think about that?
Well, Braylon Allen and Deuce Vaughn are both as good as it gets, and going into week 1, they definitely deserve to be on the list. They're guys we've talked about all offseason. Deuce Vaughn and Braylon Allen are as important to their team as Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud are to those football teams. If you took those 2 backs off of their team, they would be listless offensively. And so, great running backs. We plan on them having really good NFL careers. If they can hold up, stay healthy. Running back is a position where you can always get dinged up a little bit, but these guys are going to run at a feverish pace. And I'm not surprised to see him there on Blake's list at all.
What's wild to me is Braylon Allen last year didn't play for the first month of the season. So he's already racked up 150 yards week 1. So he's already 150 yards ahead of his pace from last year, and he's still got 3 weeks to go. So he might end up having a huge season running the football behind that huge offensive line that Wisconsin has. And they're going to be a big play action team as well. So I expect him to maybe put up some crazy numbers this year based off his week 1 performance.
And I love this conversation, and these are guys that you probably won't see as often in the Heisman conversation. And sometimes it feels a little bit like a fool's errand, right? Like, why are we putting in running backs and wide receivers and other positions that are non-quarterbacks? I'm curious, just overall, looking at the philosophy of who should win the Heisman Trophy. Carl, do you want to see it spread out among different position groups as opposed to what people just call the quarterback award?
I want to see the best player in college football win the Heisman Trophy. And to me, that player is Will Anderson at the University of Alabama. If he has a huge statistical season like he did a year ago, I think that we really need to, for the first time, consider a defensive guy since Charles Woodson getting the award. So for me, it's not about quarterback, running back, and receiver. I would just like to see the Heisman Trophy go to the best football player that college has to offer.
Yeah,
Carl,
Carl's
wait, real
right.
quick, Carl, why is he not on your list then?
Well, because this is more a statistical thing. He didn't have any sacks this week against Utah State, but he's going to get going. I expect him to have a huge game against Texas in the prime time, and he's got to still keep it up week after week. He's going to draw a lot of attention from offensive lines. He's going to draw a lot of attention in terms of the way that they're going to pass protect against him. It's going to be tougher for him to get that 15, 16, 17 sack season this year. But if he approaches that and gets that again, then you have to have him right there.
And he's a guy that can easily rack up 4 or 5 sacks in a game. I mean, I think Texas will be smart this week and they'll chip and help with the tight end against him. He probably won't have a huge game unless Texas decides for some reason to put him one-on-one versus their offensive tackles, which would be a big mistake. But he's a guy that can rack up numbers quickly. Had a couple of TFLs against Utah State in limited action, but he's definitely a guy. But to me, this is a award that's going to go to a team that's going to go deep into the college football season. A Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State player. Those are the 3 best teams in the country right now. Those are the teams that you need to keep an eye on. Their best players the cream will rise to the crop. The cream will rise to the top. And one of those players will likely emerge as your Heisman Trophy winner, in my opinion.
We're all just wasting our time then here. I mean, Blake, you've got a Kansas State player. You've got Wisconsin. Should those guys get more play in the Heisman conversation, even if their teams aren't still alive at the end of the season?
I think so. I mean, I think it's an award that should it's supposed to go to the most valuable player in the country for your team. And so it's turned into an award that goes to basically one of the better players on a great team. So I would love to see some guys that are on teams that maybe, aren't going to win as many games, but are great players, get more recognition. But unfortunately, the last few years, that's just not the way it's gone.
Certainly. Great conversation here, guys. Let's switch gears a little bit from teams who played with fire with some lower level competition, teams whose offense scored more points than their defense. I'm looking at you, Iowa. Or just teams who straight up lost. Blake, who needs the biggest bounce back in week 2?
To me, it's South Carolina's offense. I mean, South Carolina last week really struggled against Georgia State, which was surprising to me. Spencer Rattler was 13th in the SEC in quarterback rating with a 28.6 rating, which is not very good. Iowa's quarterback had a 1, so he did better than that. He had 2 interceptions and a touchdown pass. They're 109th in the country in total offense right now. They went under 5 yards per pass and under 2.5 yards per rush. So really an offensive line that struggled last week against a team that you would not expect them to. Sources that I talked to this morning say a lot of those guys are must-chant players. They've got the right guys there. They're just not quite ready yet. So they went in empty protection a lot, or empty formation a lot. So that's not a great recipe for success for an offensive line if your quarterback's not a great runner, which Spencer Rattler is not. So we'll find out this week. Is Spencer Rattler a guy? I mean, they got a really tough test at Arkansas. Drew Sanders is kind of a chess piece for Arkansas, can play a lot of positions, rush the passer. Zach Williams is a defensive end for them that had a critical sack that can get to the quarterback. So Barry Odom knows what he's doing defensively. I think South Carolina's Marcus Satterfield is one of the few coaches on their staff that doesn't have an extended contract. So it's a make or break season for him. They're going to have to do better. Scoring 21 of their 35 points off of special teams is not a recipe for success in the SEC consistently. So I'm looking for a bounce back for them playing Arkansas this week.
I also want to make sure to point out that Spencer Petras had a 1.1 QBR. So you better give him that extra decimal point. Either way, not good.
We're rounding.
It was not good no matter what. Yeah. Carl, who needs a bounce back for you?
the North Carolina Tar Heel defense, I mean, they've been really, really rough the last couple of weeks. Appalachian State outscored North Carolina 40-22 in the fourth quarter. The Tar Heels right now rank 113th in defense, giving up 6.79 yards per play through just 2 games. Gene Chizik was brought in by Mac Brown, a guy he's had a relationship with for a long time after Mac fired Jay Bateman last season in 2021. The undermanned Florida A&M team that had several players out for suspension dropped 24 on USC in a week 0 game, and they only were able to score 3 points against Jackson State. That does not bode well for where North Carolina is defensively. You're playing Georgia State. How are you going to manage against the top quarterbacks that the ACC has? You have to be able to play defense. You have what could be a generational quarterback on your football team. You have to give them some help on the defensive side. So far, the Tar Heels have been a mess on defense.
Yeah, Chase Bryce is a pretty good quarterback. We'll give him his due, but he should not be able to drop 40 points on you in the fourth quarter. That's certainly not a recipe for success. And you said it, Carl. They're going to face a lot of tough quarterbacks in the ACC. What do you need to see on Saturday that makes you know that they're headed in the right direction defensively?
You need to see guys running to the football. You need to see guys making open field tackles. You need to see guys rushing the quarterback, and you need to see them be able to defend the pass in the deep parts of the field, the things that make a great defense, and playing with a lot of speed and a lot of action. And we haven't seen that so far. We've been very passive defensively at North Carolina, and they're just giving up a ton of points right now and huge chunks of yardage on plays.
Yeah, and Blake, back to South Carolina. We kind of know what Spencer Rattler is, right? We've seen him play multiple games, but what is it that you need to see from him at South Carolina to know that he's turning the page from the past or maybe back to the past, because he did have a pretty good year there. Where do you need to see him shine on Saturday?
He just needs to be consistent. I mean, last year at Oklahoma, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. He had a lot better offensive line at Oklahoma. And they have playmakers at wide receiver. They've helped themselves in the portal. They get Dakarion Joyner back this week, which is one of their slot wide receiver type athletes. So they've got some talent around him. They've got to protect him, which would help, obviously, but he's got to be consistent. He can't turn the ball over. They kind of run an LA Rams style offense where they're a lot of quick passes and kind of behind the chains, screens and bubbles and stuff like that. So I like to see them throw the ball down the field a little bit more, but they got to trust Spencer Rattler to make those plays and make those throws. And he's going to have his work cut out for him in Fayetteville this weekend, because that's going to be loud. The Arkansas fans are some of the best in the country. And if your offensive line is struggling, then that's not a great sign for you. So hopefully he can get going and be consistent, because that's what South Carolina needs. Because if you think about it, last year, I personally didn't expect anything out of South Carolina. I thought they'd win 3, maybe 4 games. They overachieved. So I want to see them this year live up to the hype that we were hearing the whole offseason about how they've improved their roster and that Rattler was going to be the difference maker for them offensively.
We'll see. Certainly worked for the Rams this past year as they are defending Super Bowl champs. But guys, all eyes on you, Carolinas. We'll see how you do in week 2. Thank you so much for the great conversation, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube page. You're going to want to be back here tomorrow. We're making picks. You won't want to miss it. See you then.